Hey there, welcome back for another deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
Today, we're stepping into the world of true crime podcasts, but with a bit of a twist.
Ooh, a twist. I like twists.
We're not just looking at who did it, but why we're so drawn to these stories, especially the ones that leave us hanging without a neat resolution.
It's a fascinating area. I think, yeah, it's a fascinating area to explore. We're going beyond the typical whodunit and kind of digging into how we even understand the world when it throws us curveballs.
Okay, so to guide us on this journey, we've got a couple of really thought-provoking chapters. One is titled Recessive Epistemologies in True Crime Podcasting, which I'll admit sounds a bit intimidating.
Yeah, it does sound a bit academic, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But stick with us. It's not as complicated as it sounds.
And the other chapter is True Crime and Audio Media. Both seem to be part of a largest book about audio storytelling, so they should give us some great insights.
They really do. And I think, taking a close look at these sources, we're going to kind of understand how true crime has evolved in audio, from its early days on the radio to the podcasting boom we're seeing now.
Speaking of that boom, remember Serial? It felt like everyone was suddenly hooked on podcasts, dissecting every episode with their friends and family.
Serial was definitely a landmark moment for sure. But, it's worth remembering that podcasts like Criminal and Sword and Scale were already gaining a following before that.
Yeah.
They really helped pave the way for more diverse and nuanced true crime storytelling.
Right. It's not just about murders anymore.
Right.
There are podcasts delving into corruption, cults, you name it. And of course, the classic sensational cases like the Black Dahlia or the Manson murders will always have their appeal.
There's something about those enduring mysteries that keeps us coming back, almost like we're hoping that with each retelling we might finally unlock the truth.
But of course, with any popular genre, there's bound to be some pushback. The sources mention that some people have issues with what they call the American style of true crime podcasting.
Yeah. The American style usually features, like a host-driven narrative guiding the listener through the investigation. Some critics say this blurs the lines between journalism and entertainment.
Yeah, there's a concern that the host getting too personally involved could lead to bias, even if it's unintentional.
It's a valid point to consider. However, it's important to note that many of these podcasts, Serial included, actually embrace the uncertainty inherent in investigations. The host often grapples with their own doubts and struggles to find a definitive truth, which many listeners find relatable.
And this brings us to that complex-sounding term, recessive epistemology. So are you ready for this?
Bring it on. I'm ready.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's basically a style of storytelling where the pursuit of knowledge is front and center, but the answers remain elusive.
Think of it like those frustrating to-be-continued cliffhangers. But instead of waiting for the next plot twist, we're left yearning for concrete information.
It's like we're hardwired to crave those satisfying conclusions, but what happens when they never come? And it's interesting, if you look at the titles of many popular true crime podcasts, words like know, unknown, or vanished pop up all the time.
That's such a good observation. It highlights our inherent desire for resolution. We want to know, we need to know, but sometimes those answers just aren't there.
And that can be a really unsettling feeling. One of the sources actually quotes Lee McNaughton, whose brother Adrian vanished in 1972. His case was featured in the podcast, Someone Knows Something.
Oh, wow.
Lee says, what if no one knows anything? I mean, that line really gets under your skin, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. It gets at that unsettling reality that sometimes, despite our best efforts, some mysteries may never be fully solved. And that seems to be a key difference between the older true crime radio shows and these modern podcasts. The classic shows like Calling All Cars or Dragnet always had a nice, tidy ending.
Yeah, it's like they presented a simplified version of reality where good always triumphed over evil and justice was always served.
Exactly. Those older shows relied heavily on facts delivered by authority figures, usually police officers. It reinforced a sense of order and predictability.
It's interesting, though, because the sources bring up This American Life as an example of a completely different approach.
Right? This American Life often presents evidence heavily contextualized by the narration, leaving room for interpretation and acknowledging the inherent ambiguity of many situations.
So it's less about giving the audience a definitive answer and more about encouraging them to think for themselves.
Precisely. It's a shift from passively consuming information to actively engaging with different perspectives. And this is where things start to get really fascinating. The sources highlight 3 specific podcasts, Someone Knows Something, Lost in Larima, and Death at Ice Valley, as prime examples of recessive epistemology in action.
And what's really cool is how they use sound to create this almost unsettling atmosphere of mystery.
Right. Lost in Larima and Death in Ice Valley, for example, use eerie music and sound effects, almost like a sonic representation of the unknown.
It's like they're playing with our senses, making the mystery feel even more real and tangible. And then there's the way they use background sounds. They're so prominent, it's almost like you're right there in the scene.
Exactly. Like in Someone Knows Something, when you can hear the ice cracking on Holmes Lake or the rustle of leaves as the host retraces Adrian's steps. Those soundscapes really pull you into the story.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there are the clues. Or maybe we should call them unclues.
Because sometimes they seem to lead somewhere and sometimes they just disappear.
Yeah, it's true. The sources talk about how these podcasts revisit certain clues over and over again, refining theories and exploring possibilities, but without ever really reaching a definitive conclusion.
Right.
It's like a puzzle with missing pieces. We're constantly tantalized by the possibility of a solution, but it always seems just out of reach.
And I think that ambiguity is a big part of why these podcasts are so addictive.
Yeah,
It fuels endless debates and speculation among fans online. It's like everyone becomes an armchair detective trying to piece together the puzzle.
it's a testament to the power of storytelling. Even without clear-cut answers, these podcasts engage our minds and keep us hooked. We want to know more, even if knowing might ultimately be an illusion.
And then there are the locations themselves. These podcasts often take us to the edges of the map, to these remote and isolated places.
Right.
We have Larima in Australia at the end of this abandoned railroad line, the Isdal woman case in Norway shrouded in Cold War intrigue, and Adrian McNaughton vanishing near a remote Canadian lake.
Those peripheral settings definitely add to the sense of mystery. It's almost like they're hinting that some things in this world might always remain hidden just beyond our grasp.
And one thing that always strikes me is how the hosts of these podcasts often physically retrace the steps of the missing person. It's as if they're trying to embody the mystery to experience it firsthand.
It's a powerful technique, and it creates a real sense of surrogate embodiment for the listener. You can almost imagine yourself there with David Ridgen calling out Adrian's name across Holmes Lake, or walking those same paths as the Isdal woman with the hosts of Death in Ice Valley.
Right.
You're right there with them, sharing in their uncertainty and the longing for answers.
It's almost like a reverse seance, trying to connect with the accent instead of the dead.
It's a fascinating comparison. And speaking of fascinating comparisons, the sources draw this really interesting parallel between these podcasts and a literary concept called mimetic realism, developed by a critic named Erich Auerbach. Have you heard of him?
I have to admit, literature isn't really my strong suit, but I'm always up for learning something new.
Well, Auerbach contrasted two distinct styles of realism, Homeric and biblical. You're probably familiar with Homer from the Odyssey.
Oh, right, with Odysseus and the Cyclops and all that.
Exactly. Auerbach used a scene from the Odyssey where Odysseus is recognized by his old nurse because of a scar to illustrate the Homeric style. He argued that this type of realism is all about clarity and order. Everything is clearly laid out for the audience, no ambiguity, no room for interpretation.
So it's kind of like those old school true crime radio shows we were talking about before. Everything wrapped up nice and neat.
Precisely. Think of Dragnet with its straightforward delivery of facts and emphasis on resolution. Very Homeric in its approach.
But these recessive epistemology podcasts, they're doing something different, right?
Right. They align more with the biblical style, which Auerbach illustrated using the story of Abraham and Isaac. This style is full of ambiguity and demands that the reader actively interpret what's being presented.
So instead of being spoon-fed a simple solution, we're challenged to engage with the uncertainty and grapple with the possibility that we may never know the full story.
Exactly. It's not that these podcasts are abandoning realism, but they're embracing a more complex and nuanced version of it.
In a way, they're actually inviting us to become active participants in creating meaning. We're not just passive consumers of information anymore. We're like detectives, piecing together a puzzle that may not have a complete picture.
That's a really insightful way to put it. It makes you wonder if this style of storytelling reflects something bigger. Is it a growing cultural fascination with the unknown, or maybe a reaction to the world becoming so complex where easy answers are harder and harder to find?
It's definitely a lot to think about. So let's recap for a second. We've been talking about how true crime and audio has evolved from those old school radio shows with their tidy resolutions to this new wave of podcasts that embrace ambiguity and invite us to question everything.
We've explored this captivating world of recessive epistemology, where the pursuit of knowledge is paramount, but the answers frustratingly remain just out of reach.
And we've looked at how podcasts like Someone Knows Something, Lost in Larama, and Death in Ice Valley use sound, setting, and storytelling techniques to draw us into their web of mystery. But before we wrap things up, there's one more thing we need to explore.
And that's the question of why. Why are we so drawn to these stories that offer no easy answers? What is it about the unknown that keeps us coming back for more?
Is it that we crave some sense of control in a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable? Or is it something else, like a fascination, maybe a little bit morbid, with the darker side of humanity?
Or perhaps it's a deeper longing for connection, a need to understand the experiences of others, even when those experiences are filled with tragedy and loss.
One of the sources suggests is that it might even be a reflection of our own anxieties about a world where truth is increasingly elusive and information is constantly being manipulated and reshaped.
These are all thought-provoking questions, and as you continue to explore the world of true crime podcasts, I encourage you to think not just about the cases themselves, but also about what draws us to them. What do they reveal about us and the way we make sense of the world around us?
It's like these podcasts hold up a mirror, reflecting our own deepest uncertainties and making us confront the limits of what we can truly know.
Yeah, it's definitely not your average lighthearted listening experience.
Right.
And that's precisely what makes them so compelling. They challenge us to think critically, question our assumptions, and grapple with the complexities of the world.
We're stepping outside the comfort zone of easy answers and venturing into a realm where mystery and ambiguity reign supreme.
And in that process of exploration, we might just uncover something profound about ourselves and the human condition.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into true crime podcasts, what are the key takeaways you'd want our listeners to remember?
Well, first and foremost, I think it's clear that certain true crime podcasts have evolved beyond simply trying to solve a case. They've become a way to explore the very nature of knowledge, truth, and our own human limitations in comprehending those things.
It's like a philosophical journey disguised as a crime investigation.
Exactly. Secondly, we've seen how these podcasts use a powerful combination of ambiguous clues, immersive soundscapes, and evocative settings to create a listening experience that's truly captivating.
It goes beyond just what we hear. It's about how we feel as we listen. We're transported to these remote locations, we feel the chill of the unknown, and we grapple with the same uncertainties as the hosts and investigators.
And lastly, and this is perhaps the most crucial point, these podcasts encourage us to be active listeners, not just passive consumers of information. They challenge us to form our own conclusions, question the narratives presented to us, and accept the possibility that some mysteries may never be fully solved.
It's a call to engage with the world around us with a curious and critical mind. It's a reminder that truth can be elusive and that the journey of discovery is just as valuable as reaching a final destination.
Absolutely. If you're looking for a podcast that will entertain you, challenge you, and leave you with more questions than answers, I highly recommend checking out the ones we've discussed today. Someone Knows Something, Lost in Larima, and Death in Ice Valley each offer a unique and thought-provoking exploration of the true crime genre.
And who knows, you might find yourself pulled into the world of online sleuthing, joining the ranks of armchair detectives determined to unravel these enduring mysteries.
Just remember, the most captivating mysteries often defy simple explanations.
So embrace the unknown, keep your ears open, and happy listening.